Okay, there have been some thrilling races this year, such as Canada and Britain, but this race was insane, so let's get into it. Okay, so I'm gonna start on Saturday because this was the day when the sprint race and it's supposed to be the qualifying day. However, the reason why I'm skipping Friday was because nothing really happened. It was just practice and then a qualifying session. So I'll kind of run you down what happened on Friday. So on Friday, Oscar Piastri took pole with Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen right behind him. So it was basically when that Norris and Piastri would switch, and that's exactly what happened in the sprint. In the sprint, Oscar Piastri led for most of the race, and Max Verstappen and Lando Norris were trailing right behind. Verstappen started fourth, but managed to get past Leclerc pretty quickly, so he was right on their tail at the beginning. So for most of the race, Verstappen trailed behind him, and Norris was also behind. He didn't quite have the pace. However, I think he might have been able to overtake Piastri, especially in the first couple opening laps. Now, Piastri, of course, let Lando Norris through to get the win to obviously gain points on Max Verstappen. So, McLaren, of course, they had a good position in that sprint race, so it made sense for him to switch. And, well, what a great time they switched too, because there was also a VSC for when Hulkenberg had an engine failure, so they absolutely timed that to perfection. And overall, nothing much really happened. I mean, you could say that Verstappen was in the fight with the McLarens and he almost overtook Piastri at one point, but so super close, but still wasn't able to do it. Overall, that was what really happened in the front, and nothing much happened behind. Behrman was fighting a lot with Hulkenberg especially, and Perez and Hamilton were kind of making their way up. However, nothing much happened. We did see a bit of on-track battling between Lawson and Perez, which was pretty entertaining to see, of course. Lawson, of course, trying to fight for that Red Bull seat, and Perez is trying to fight to keep his seat. So those two's rivalry is really getting interesting and pretty spicy too. So I can't wait to see how that rivalry goes, especially towards the end of this year. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens between those two. Now, of course, in this race, Perez and Hamilton both started way down where they were supposed to be. Hamilton and Perez got knocked out in Q2, so they were on the back foot completely. So they kind of struggled to make their way up, and Lawson was in the points up until Perez overtook him. Now, of course, with Piastri swapping positions with Lando Norris, it gives Norris a few point advantage against Verstappen. Now, of course, I do like to point out Verstappen, even though he finished third on track, he did not finish third in the official classification, because what really happened was he picked up a 5-second penalty for a safety car restart infringement. So that's why it dropped him down behind Charles Leclerc into P4. So that gave Norris even a bigger advantage than he was actually supposed to. So he got first in the sprint with Verstappen behind in fourth. So he gained a couple of points, not a huge difference, but it was a few points that were pretty vital for him going into the race tomorrow. Now, of course, I do also want to talk about what happened in the later parts of Saturday. So Saturday, of course, it was supposed to be qualifying in the late afternoon. However, a huge storm hit Sao Paulo, and of course, as you could see, the safety car had to go out on track and kind of assess the conditions. And of course, it led to multiple delays. So, of course, the qualifying ended up getting postponed because of these heavy rains. And that's when the rain really started coming in for this weekend. And after that incident, the rain was going to play like a huge part in qualifying, and especially in the race, because qualifying got moved over into tomorrow morning, and the race was going to be a little later in the afternoon. Okay, so now we're in Sunday. So qualifying got moved over to Sunday morning because of the rains in Saturday afternoon. So on Sunday morning, it was also again wet. However, not quite as wet as in Saturday afternoon. However, it was still wet. Franco Colapinto crashed in Q1, which was the first red flag that we had out of 5. So Colapinto crashed out for Williams in Q1. Alex Albon made it to Q3, which was really good. However, he crashed too. So Williams now had 2 crashed cars, and unfortunately, that was it for Albon's weekend, as he wasn't able to recover from that crash and they couldn't rebuild his car. For Sainz, he also crashed. He crashed in Q2, which also made Verstappen and Perez go out along with him. This was also, again, Sainz's first out of 2 crashes he was going to have today. Along with that, we had Fernando Alonso. And based on his crash, you could just tell that the conditions were bad, because Alonso is like one of the best drivers, and I'd say one of the best drivers in the rain especially. So for him to crash out too just showed how bad the conditions were. And then we had Lance Stroll. Now, I think for all of us, I don't think that was a huge surprise. It's just unfortunate. Both Aston Martins, both Williams, and well, yeah, I don't think anyone was surprised with Stroll crashing out. So, of course, with those 5 red flags, it proved to give a pretty different order compared to what we usually expect. Of course, Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, Hamilton were all down in the bottom. Of course, I'd like to point out Verstappen dropped down to 17th with the grid penalty, and Sainz started in the pit lane, so it was all nothing. Of course, this was an iconic moment. Hamilton, of course, drove Ayrton Senna's McLaren MP4. This was just an unbelievable, iconic moment, and it was just crazy to see how Hamilton raced in his hero's car, of course, through Interlagos in the wet. I mean, I don't know if you can have like another more iconic moment than that. Hamilton drove in the rain for about 3 or 4 laps, so it was, of course, very wet, very slippery, and he had the crowd on his feet. So this was a really good moment. So I'm really glad that he was able to drive his hero's car. Okay, so now the race began, and again it was in the wet, rainy conditions. Based on these conditions, I think it was pretty clear that everyone was getting excited, because this would be a really interesting race. Now Stroll, of course, on the formation lap managed to crash. Now, he had a weird spin, and then instead of reversing, just drove into the gravel and got stuck. So that was unfortunate. But because of his incident, it led to a really weird safety car infringement for Norris and other people. However, after that, we got the race underway, and it was a pretty good start for Russell. He got past Lando Norris at the start, and Verstappen, well, he went from 17th to 10th in about like a few corners. So Verstappen had probably a way better start than any of us had expected, and his good start continued, because from 17th to 10th, he then started continuing to make more progress. He started, in the first few laps, he started overtaking about 2 or 3 cars, each about 1 a lap. So he was overtaking and making positions. And at the front, Norris wasn't making much progress either. So it was good for Verstappen, because he was now making positions and not trying to lose as much ground as he would have if he got a bad start. And so this was really good for Verstappen. He was making the positions he needed to. Now, of course, up in the front, Norris, again, he just couldn't get past George Russell, so he was stuck in second. And then there was a bit of a gap to Yuki Tsunoda, who was in an unbelievable 3rd position from his qualifying performance. He held a small train of him, Ocon, Lawson, and Leclerc, who was also struggling to get past those guys. So mainly we were seeing that there were a lot of trains forming, and Verstappen was soon to join that train, because he managed to get past the other cars pretty quickly too. And for the first 10 or so laps, Verstappen just got stuck and everyone was just stuck in their position. However, that's when everything changed, when Hülkenberg spun out. Now, unfortunately, he's managed to get stuck on this kind of elevated part of the runoff circuit, so he sadly got disqualified because the marshals had to help him get away, which is not allowed. So he, of course, spun out. And this was when the weather started getting pretty bad. So now it sent everyone into chaos. Some people started pitting and the others started staying out. Some notable people that kind of pitted were Norris, Russell, Lawson, Leclerc, and a few others that also came in. For them, they thought that they didn't know that for them it was the best option at that moment. So they decided to pit and get a free pit stop under the safety car, which would really help them out later on. However, things weren't going to go so well in a few moments, which I'll explain. While that was happening, Verstappen and Ocon decided not to pit. So those two were out in the front leading, and a few others also decided not to pit, but most of them decided to pit. So that meant that it was a mixed up order compared to what we had for the first 20 or so laps. Now the rain started to intensify even more, so it got to the point where it was getting like monsoon level almost. So it was really, really bad. Torrential rain. It was just terribly bad. Now, of course, in the back, of course, Behrman and a few others, of course, they got caught out. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but it did show some yellow flags, and I did kind of see they showed Behrman and a few others going off the track, so I'm not sure what happened there, but I can definitely guess it's from that wet weather, so the weather was really causing some bad issues over there throughout the field and throughout the grid. Williams, of course, had Franco Colapinto, and he came into the pits too. So he was having not a great race from his perspective. He was kind of struggling to make any progress from where he was. And, well, when he came into the pits, he came on for a fresh, slick set of inters. However, things weren't going to go so well for him because he ended up crashing. So this was a really unfortunate moment, and that is when it completely turned the race on its head, because now everyone who had pitted completely lost out in track position and in positions, because now they initiated a red flag, which meant that now the likes of Ocon and Verstappen and the other people who didn't pit were able to now start from the front with new set of tires. So that was a huge blow, and that was probably the moment that lost Norris and the others a potential win. Okay, so now after the red flag, they immediately restarted the race, and that is when the chaos kind of ensued for a lap or two. So of course, Norris was now on the back foot along with Russell, Leclerc, and a few others, especially the RBs, because now they had pitted during that red flag, or before the red flag, so now they had completely lost out. Meanwhile, at the front, Verstappen once again had an amazing restart, so he was able to quickly get past Ocon right after the restart, which was of course the winning move that easily gave him the win in this race. He had gone from almost 17th to 1st, and well, albeit with a little luck, however, he managed to do it, and now for the next 20 laps, he was going to lead for most of the race. Of course, this move was late, very, very far back, and he managed to get it done. And of course, he's had some moments with Ocon, so for him to do it very cleanly and nicely, it was really good. He's been making really good moves, especially from that same corner that he did. He pulled it on a few other people, which was just really, really good from him. So, meanwhile, other people were starting to struggle. So, Hamilton was one of them. He was, of course, struggling most of the race, in fact. So, he struggled with the pure pace, and here you can see Lawson in the rain coming from far back, and he managed to get the move done on Lewis Hamilton. So, that was really, really interesting to see. Of course, Hamilton's usually unbelievable at this track. In fact, I think that Senna's car, he probably would have driven faster in Senna's car than his Mercedes to show because of his terrible pace in this race. So, while Lawson got the move on him, Verstappen out on front was cruising along. He quickly got far away from Ocon, so he was able to pull out like a 10-second gap in the next like 5 or 10 laps, so he was comfortably leading, and I think from that point onwards it was pretty clear Verstappen had the win checked out for him. And well, he did, because now he ended up winning the race from 17th to 1st. It was a really rare occurrence for someone to come from that far back to be able to win, and with Lando Norris in P6, it was an absolutely good moment for him and for the championship, because now Norris's championship hopes were pretty much done at this point from this race. Verstappen's amazing, brilliant drive in the wet rain in Brazil gave him a great win, of course. Now, another great stellar performance came from Alpine. I mean, what a race these guys put up today. They got second and third, with Ocon getting second and Gasly getting third. I mean, the French people must be like yelling and leaping in joy because these people, despite the tractor they've been driving, they managed to do a great job in this race. And from all the wet rain and chaos, they were able to stay away from it. So it gave Alpine a double podium in quite a while, and I think this might be actually one of their first double podiums for Alpine especially. So it was great to see them back on the podium, of course. And on the other hand, there were other people that lost out. Norris especially, Russell, McLaren overall just lost out. And it was a great day for Alpine because then they went from 9th to 6th in the Constructors' Championship. It was a great day for them and for the whole team. Now, of course, on the podium we had Verstappen, Ocon, and Gasly. It was quite an infamous good podium. The French and the Dutch all together. I mean, what a race this produced. It produced an amazing race, absolute chaos throughout the race, and an amazing result with a great podium. And these three fully deserved it based on the race they showed today. Now, of course, I'm gonna move into the standings. So this is after the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. And as you can see, Verstappen is continued to extend his lead, and it's pretty much stayed similar. Hamilton, of course, dropping down to 7th. Now, as you can see, Verstappen is now at 393 points now. So this is after the race, so he's extended his lead by even more. He's extended it by 62 points. So I think at this point, Norris is going to have to pray for a miracle, but I think it's over for him and for McLaren for their title hopes. So, thanks for watching. If you watched all the way, thank you so much. Please subscribe as it would help me a lot. Goodbye.